Welcome to this exploration of one of the most unsettling instances in Missouri Ozark history. Please let me know where you're watching from and what time you're listening to this narration in the comments section before we start. What locations and times of day or night these recorded stories reach are of interest to us. The Ozark Mountains' quiet before daybreak conceals mysteries that the fog won't tell. In 1869, a strange home known locally as the Whitfield Manor stood in the isolated hollows of Shannon County, Missouri. The 7 identical windows that lined the eastern facade of this building were what made it noteworthy, not its architecture, though it would subsequently be the focus of much conjecture. Supposedly constructed for one of Jeremiah Whitfield's 7 adult daughters, they were all precisely spaced apart and had the same size and shape. The Whitfield case is still regarded as one of the most unsettling events in Missouri history, not because of what was found, but because of what was kept secret forever. A once affluent street. Louis merchant named Jeremiah Whitfield came to the area in 1862, according to county records, and bought about 300 acres of remote woodland along what is now Route 19, some 12 miles south of Eminence. The Shannon County Register, published on the 18th of April, 1862, states that Whitfield arrived with 7 women, all of whom were identified as his daughters. Elizabeth, Catherine, Margaret, Josephine, Rebecca Virginia, and Sophia Whitfield were the names that were listed. The county clerk was impressed by the fact that all 7 women seemed to be about the same age, between 25 and 35, according to his personal journal, which was found decades later. They were all dressed same in gray outfits with high necks, and none were married, which was unusual for women in that era. Whitfield allegedly said that his wife had returned to the earth, which is understood as widowhood, when asked about her. Locals viewed the land Whitfield bought as essentially useless because it was rocky, had poor farming soil, was covered in dense forests, and had a little brook that would overflow during spring rains. Whitfield, however, made a sizable payment and started building what would be known as the 7-windowed mansion right away. In 1863, the nearest neighbor, Amos Breedlove, who lived about 2 miles away, wrote to his brother about the building. The peculiarity of the structure cannot be overstated. The eastern wall contains 7 identical windows, evenly spaced, as if to allow the morning sun to penetrate 7 identical rooms. Whitfield supervises every aspect of the construction himself, becoming agitated when workers deviate from his precise instructions. The daughters are rarely seen, and when they appear, they move in absolute silence. Unusual specs for the windows themselves were later noted by local craftsmen who were recruited for the building. They had to measure exactly 42 inches in width and 63 inches in height. At a significant cost, the glass panes had to be imported from a certain Boston manufacturer. Whitfield's insistence that every window be set at a slightly different angle, differences so tiny that they were hardly noticeable to the unaided eye, was the most odd. Nevertheless, he used sophisticated tools to measure each one several times, making little tweaks until he was happy. The house, a large 2-story building made of local stone and timber, was finished by the winter of 1863 and stood on a small rise with a view of the creek. As was already indicated, the eastern wall with its 7 windows was the most striking feature. No one from the neighborhood was ever permitted inside to verify the local tales that there was a distinct bedroom behind each window, one for each daughter. The Whitfield family lived in near total seclusion for the next 6 years. Only once a month, when Jeremiah would come by wagon to buy supplies, did they have any communication with the closest town, Eminence. He always had 7 of everything on his list, according to shopkeepers. 7 spools of thread, 7 pairs of gloves, and 7 bars of soap. Whitfield's simple response to inquiries about his daughters, that they were engaged in their devotions, gave some people the impression that the family was part of some strange religious sect, as was customary for merchants of the time who frequently gave credit to clients. Thomas Ledbetter, who owned the general store in Eminence from 1860 to 1875, kept thorough records of every transaction. The Shannon County Historical Society has retained his ledgers, which demonstrate how Whitfield's purchases became more unusual over time. At first, they included standard household goods like clothing, food necessities, and simple tools. By 1865, the list contained rare plants like belladonna and wolfsbane, enormous numbers of candles, specialist astronomy instruments, and books with Latin titles that were transported from as far away as Europe. Ledbetter's private memos, written in the margins, show increasing worry. Mr. Whitfield's manner grows more agitated with each visit. His hands tremble when conducting business. He speaks of astronomical conjunctions and stellar alignments, claiming the position of the Pleiades holds special significance. When asked directly about the welfare of his daughters, he becomes evasive, stating only that their education progresses according to the celestial schedule. The fact that no one claimed to have ever seen all 7 daughters at the same time during those 6 years is what makes this case especially disturbing. The majority of residents would really say that they only ever saw 2 at a time, always keeping their distance from one another and never conversing. The county physician, Dr. Ellsworth Jensen, was called to the property in 1865 to treat Miss Whitfield for a high fever, according to his notes. When he got there, he was told to go to a tiny outbuilding where one of the daughters was sick, rather than being allowed into the main house. Jensen tried to speak privately with the woman, but Whitfield never left them alone. Jensen wrote in his medical journal, "The patient refused to speak, communicating only through nods." Most disturbing was the discovery of unusual ligature marks around her wrists, as if she had been recently bound. When questioned about these marks, the father dismissed them as the result of devotional practices. Whitfield became irritated and insisted that she stay near her window for healing when the doctor indicated that she would recover better in town where he could keep an eye on her condition. Disturbed by the encounter, Jensen gave what care he could and walked away. Jensen confessed his suspicions in a 1962 letter to a medical colleague in St. Louis. "I fear something unwholesome transpires at the Whitfield property." The young woman's condition suggested not just physical illness, but a profound melancholy. Her eyes held the vacant look I have observed in patients at the state asylum. Most concerning was her reaction when her father mentioned the approaching alignment. A visible trembling overtook her entire body. Jensen himself vanished 3 months after this visit, allegedly while en route to a nearby county to provide legal advice on a matter. There was never a trace of the doctor, but his horse and medical bag were found down the route. Local skepticism of the enigmatic residents was understandable, even though no direct link to the Whitfield family was ever proven. To update land records, a surveying delegation from the county assessor's office came to the Whitfield property in October 1866. Their official report includes a brief but upsetting finding. Upon nearing the property, we observed 7 female figures standing in a perfect circle in a clearing near the house. Each wore identical gray dresses and stood with arms outstretched toward the center of the circle, where Mr. Whitfield appeared to be taking measurements with a sextant. Upon noticing our approach, the group quickly dispersed, the women returning to the house while Whitfield came to intercept us. He was adamant that we not proceed further onto his property, claiming a celestial alignment in progress could not be disturbed. When questioned about the nature of this alignment, he spoke incoherently about the Seven Sisters constellation and a terrestrial mirror he was creating. Due to his agitated state and our discomfort with the situation, we completed our assessment from the property boundary. The acquisitions Jeremiah started making in 1867 were even more intriguing. When the store owner questioned Whitfield about these purchases, Whitfield explained that they were necessary for keeping the wilderness at bay. Many would later speculate that the wilderness may not have been the forest surrounding the property. But hardware store receipts found during later investigations show orders for unusual amounts of chains, locks, and something listed only as restraints. Around the posthumous investigation in 1870, Silas Humphrey, a blacksmith who completed a number of Whitfield's orders for custom metalwork around this time, gave a deposition. Humphrey claims that Whitfield ordered 7 identical sets of iron brackets with locking mechanisms that were intended to be fixed to stone walls. Humphrey observed that the design was unsuitable for such a purpose, but finished the task as required. Whitfield responded that they were for mounting astronomical instruments that needed to be precisely positioned and secured. During Whitfield's few trips to town in 1868, His conduct became more and more unpredictable. Several reports describe him muttering to himself about approaching alignment, as well as the sisters reaching perfect harmony. The local pastor, Reverend Isaiah Pembroke, wrote private diary, a worrying meeting, encountered Mr. Whitfield after services today. Though he did not attend worship, he waited outside the church, seemingly eager to discuss theological matters. When I suggested such notions bordered on paganism, he became agitated, declaring that science and divinity are merely different languages describing the same cosmic order. Most concerning was his statement that his daughters were being prepared as vessels for celestial essence, and that each had a designated window through which the transformation would occur. I encouraged him to bring his family to Sunday services, but he laughed unnervingly, saying they were already engaged in more significant worship. Locals had started to discover something even more disturbing. By the beginning of 1869, his speech was really unsettling. He mentioned old star religions and asked me whether I thought the sky could grant immortality if they were in harmony with earthly vessels. On his infrequent trips to town, Jeremiah's entourage of women had diminished. Previously, he could bring 2 daughters, but now he came by himself. In February 1869, the postmaster confronted Whitfield directly about his family, to which Whitfield allegedly responded, "My daughters remain at home where they belong. Each has her window, and each must remain true to her purpose." Whitfield made a number of sizable purchases in the spring and summer of 1869 that, looking back, point to the planning of an important occasion. He purchased 7 identical white garments, a lot of white candles, and certain herbs used in rituals from a seamstress in the nearby town of West Plains in May, giving remarkably accurate dimensions for each. He paid more for faster delivery of a specialized telescope he ordered in July from a Chicago-based scientific equipment company. He most famously visited a jeweler in Springfield in August 1869 and ordered 7 identical silver medallions, each etched with what the jeweler subsequently referred to as an unusual astronomical chart centered on the Pleiades constellation. Whitfield's declining mental state is disturbingly revealed in a letter discovered among his belongings after his death, never sent but sent to an unidentified Harvard University colleague. The alignment approaches. My calculations confirm that on September 13th, the conjunction will be perfect. The terrestrial 7 and the celestial 7 will align precisely at dawn. The vessels are prepared, though some have required more rigorous conditioning than others. Occasional resistance was anticipated and has been overcome. The windows are positioned with mathematical precision, each refracting the light at the corresponding stellar energy. When the transformation takes place, I shall accomplish what no astronomer has ever achieved: the perfect marriage of celestial bodies with earthly vessels. Immortality through stellar communion. The Ozarks were hit by a powerful storm on the evening of the 12th of September 1869. Several Shannon County homes, including the far-off Whitfield house, were struck by lightning. When Amos Breedlove noticed the fire from his land, he rode through the rain to help. His findings would serve as the basis for one of the most unsettling historical narratives about Missouri. According to Breedlove's sworn statement to the Shannon County recorded on the 14th of September 1869, upon approaching the Whitfield property, I observed flames consuming the eastern portion of the house. The 7 windows were clearly visible, illuminated by the fire behind them. I called out, receiving no response. Upon entering through the unlocked front door, I discovered the main portion of the house to be eerily empty. No furniture, no personal belongings, as if no one had been living there. The eastern section, however, contained 7 identical rooms, each accessible only through a heavy door from the main hallway, each with a window facing the sunrise. 6 of the rooms were empty, save for a single wooden chair positioned directly before the window. The 7th contained the body of Jeremiah Whitfield, seated in his chair facing the window, his back to the door. The cause of death appeared to be a deep laceration across the throat. Breedlove's testimony continues with details initially omitted from official reports but later discovered in his personal journal. What the official record does not reflect is the state of Whitfield's body beyond the fatal wound. His eyes were open, fixed in an expression of rapturous expectation rather than terror. More disturbing were the 7 distinct symbols carved into his forehead, crude representations of stars, and what I recognized as the pattern of the Pleiades. Most unsettling of all was the discovery that each of the 7 room doors could only be locked from the outside, with no interior mechanism for opening them. Yet all stood open, their locks apparently untouched. Most disturbing of all was what was not found. There was no trace of any of the 7 daughters. No bodies were discovered in the fire's aftermath. No evidence of their departure. No indication of where they might have gone. It was as if they had simply vanished, leaving only the 7 windows as evidence they had ever existed at all. The investigation that followed left more questions than it resolved. None of the Whitfield daughters had birth certificates, according to county documents. Investigations into Jeremiah's supposed past residence in Street Lewis produced no proof that he had a family there. Upon thorough examination following his passing, the property deed revealed that the owner was the Seven Sisters Trust, a legal entity that could not be linked to any recognized organization, rather than Jeremiah Whitfield. Additional unsettling information was discovered during a closer inspection of the site. Investigators found what seemed to be an astronomy laboratory in a small outbuilding that had survived the fire. In addition to celestial charts and advanced telescopes, the room included 7 identical silver pendulums hanging above a circular stone that was embedded with various minerals. This outbuilding held a leather-bound diary with thousands of computations that meticulously tracked the movements of the Pleiades constellation. There was only one statement in the last entry, which was made on September 12, 1869. Dawn brings transcendence. When detectives found a secret dungeon beneath the house's eastern wing, the case became much more complex. 7 tiny rooms, each right below one of the 7 windows above, are described in sheriff's reports. Evidence of prolonged occupancy could be found in each chamber, including a chamber pot, a narrow bed, and few personal belongings. The shackles that were attached to each chamber's wall and displayed evidence of frequent use were the most unsettling. The obvious and horrifying conclusion that sprang from this discovery was that the 7 girls were women who were held against their will and had not been Whitfield's family at all. However, this explanation also had flaws. During the relevant time period, Missouri and the neighboring states had not received any reports of 7 missing women. On occasion, the women had been spotted around the town, moving around freely and without apparent coercion. And why did they seem to vanish before the fire, if they were prisoners? The sheriff of Shannon County, James McCready, noted in his official report a point that deeply concerned him. Each of the underground chambers contained a journal apparently maintained by its occupant. Most pages had been deliberately removed, leaving only scattered entries that paint a confusing picture. Some entries suggest a voluntary participation in what is referred to as the Great Work or the Alignment. Others contain what appear to be desperate pleas for release. Most disturbing is that the handwriting within individual journals changes dramatically over time, beginning with educated, refined script and deteriorating into almost childlike scrawls. This suggests either a severe mental deterioration or potentially that different individuals occupied the same chambers at different times. The location's remoteness and the limited forensic methods available in 1869 hindered the inquiry. After 3 weeks, the case was officially classified as death by misadventure with suspicious circumstances. The property was abandoned, and the remains of the house were left to deteriorate in the remote valley. No bodies were discovered, and there was no obvious evidence of foul play beyond Whitfield's own death, which some speculated might have been suicide. The episode was a troubling but mostly forgotten aspect of local history for almost a century. Then, in 1957, as a forestry service road was being built through the old Whitfield property, workmen discovered a metal box buried about 3 feet underground where the house's eastern wall would have been. A journal with an unidentified author was found inside. Nevertheless, subsequent handwriting analysis would indicate that the writer was a lady with education in the 1,850 seconds or 1,860 seconds. There are just 7 entries in the journal, which is currently housed in the archives of the Missouri Historical Society. They are all dated September 1st, 1863, 1869. Though the handwriting becomes more erratic over time, the disturbing message is the same in each entry. I sit at my window and watch for the dawn. He says, "When the right day comes, the light will set us free. My sisters sleep in darkness. It is my turn to watch. I alone am trusted with the light today. Tomorrow belongs to another. We take our turns. We keep our silence. We wait for the day of perfect alignment." The final entry, dated September 1st, 1869, just 11 days before the fire, reads, "The waiting ends with the harvest moon. 7 windows, 7 sisters, 7 sacrifices made, 7 sacrifices required in return. He believes he will transcend. We know better. The sunrise will bring a different transformation altogether. The key has been turned. We have learned patience in our windowless rooms below. Now we will teach him darkness in return." When Dr. Eleanor Apprentice examined the journal for the Historical Society in 1958, she found a number of oddities in it. The assertion that each annual entry was written precisely 1 year apart is supported by the little compositional variations in the ink used for each one. The paper itself is more unique. Each entry is written on a distinct kind of paper, but they are all linked together, as though they were gathered from separate sources. The examination of fingerprints retained in the oils on the pages is the most illuminating. The idea that several women wrote to what would initially appear to be a single author's journal is supported by preliminary testing that shows at least 5 different people handled these pages substantially. Dr. Harold Mackenzie, an anthropology professor at the University of Missouri at the time, got interested in the Whitfield case in 1962 after reviewing the data that was available, including property surveys. He discovered something that further complicated the already unsettling story. The 7 windows had been built with an odd level of accuracy. They resembled the Pleiades constellation, also called the 7 Sisters, when plotted on a map and linked to other geological elements on the land, such as a unique boulder, an odd tree formation, or a bend in the creek. Mackenzie's investigation went beyond geographic alignments. Collaborating with university astronomers, he thoroughly examined Whitfield's astronomical computations discovered in the outbuilding. Evidence of a fixation on a particular celestial event surfaced. A time when the Pleiades constellation would perfectly line up with the eastern horizon at dawn, visible from the 7 windows in a specific order as the Earth revolved. The astronomers confirmed that such an event would only happen at that exact spot once every 28 years. Mackenzie's finding on the actual location of the house was more important. He used astronomical calculations to calculate that the sun would have risen in perfect alignment with the 7th central window on the morning of the 13th of September, 1869, the day following the fire. At that same position, this astronomical event would only happen once every 28 years. In mid-19th century intellectual circles, such cults were known to exist, especially among people who were interested in what was then known as celestial divination. In Astronomical Obsession and Ritual Imprisonment, the Whitfield Case, published in 1963, Mackenzie put forth a troubling theory. The evidence suggests Whitfield believed he could achieve some form of transcendence or immortality by creating a perfect terrestrial reflection of the Pleiades constellation, using 7 women as vessels for what he perceived as celestial energy. Mackenzie speculated that Whitfield might have been a member of a small-scale astronomical cult, perhaps associated with certain esoteric European traditions that saw the Pleiades as having mystical significance. The windows were intended to collect particular celestial light at the precise time of perfect alignment. Thus, they were more than just symbolic. The women were probably housed in the subterranean chambers for preparation or purification in between their planned observations at the windows above. Whitfield may have believed that each lady required to be attuned to a particular star in the constellation, as evidenced by the revolving nature of their responsibilities, as indicated by the recovered notebook. In academic circles, Mackenzie's study generated a lot of debate, with many criticizing his arguments as theoretical. His most unsettling conclusions, however, would get support from later findings. Until 1965, when an archivist at the Massachusetts State Library found a connection while cataloging the records of the now-defunct Northfield Academy for Young Ladies. The identities of the 7 women were unknown. There had been a small scandal in 1861 when 7 students and 1 professor of astronomy vanished from the academy, most likely eloping together. Despite having different names, the 7 young women's physical characteristics were remarkably similar to those of the Whitfield daughters. The most telling was a group photo of the 7 pupils holding astronomical instruments while posing around their lecturer, who was listed as Jeremiah Wickham rather than Whitfield. The back was inscribed, "The Pleiades Circle, 1861. May our studies of the heavens elevate us beyond our earthly constraints." According to Academy records, Wickham had been fired from his post in early 1861 due to his unconventional teachings and unsuitable intimacy with a few chosen students. According to reports, his lectures had shifted from discussing ordinary astronomy to talking about the divine nature of celestial bodies and stellar awareness. According to one faculty complaint from January 1861, Professor Wickham has abandoned scientific rigor in favor of mystical speculation, claiming the Pleiades cluster contains the secret to transcending human limitations. Several impressionable students have become devoted to these theories, forming what amounts to a cult of personality around him. If Wickham and Whitfield were the same person, then it is possible that what started out as an academic astronomical society has gradually turned into something far more sinister. Why would an educated man build a mansion with such precise heavenly alignments, isolate himself and 7 former students in the isolated Ozark wilderness, and then imprison the women in subterranean chambers? The last bits of evidence discovered in 1968 might hold the answer. The creek that flows through the former Whitfield property dried up completely during an exceptionally harsh drought, exposing a number of stone markings that are often obscured by water and lodged in the creek bed. The remains of 7 female victims were found buried in a circular fashion around a central location when county authorities excavated the area. According to forensic analysis, which was constrained by the available technology at the time, the remains had been interred for several decades, which is in keeping with the Whitfield timeline. The forensic pathologist who studied the bones, Dr. Marcus Hollingsworth, reported a number of unsettling findings. With their arms extended as though in prayer, each skeleton was arranged with its back to the center. Even more unsettling was the finding that every skull had a tiny, neatly drilled hole in the middle of the forehead. It looks like a specialized tool was used to make these holes before death. Additionally, a silver pendant that was similar and inscribed with a different Pleiades constellation star was worn around the neck of each victim. The most important finding was that each burial had a unique mineral deposit: iron ore, copper, silver, gold, mercury, tin, and lead, the 7 metals that ancient astronomy traditionally connected with celestial bodies. The tomb's locations were exactly in line with the pattern Mackenzie had discovered linking the 7 windows to the landscape. On the morning of September 13th, if one were to stand in the middle of this circle of graves, the sun would rise directly over the house's central window, which is now completely demolished. The findings of a 1968 airborne survey by the Forestry Service were the most alarming of all. The entire area surrounding the former Whitfield property, including the location of the house foundation, the creek, several rock formations, and the burial places, resembled the Pleiades constellation when shot from above during the drought. While certain characteristics were naturally occurring, others were obviously altered by humans. The whole property was now a terrestrial reflection of the heavenly structure. Whitfield's astronomical diaries were examined in greater detail as a result of this discovery. In the seemingly random calculations, University of Missouri cryptographers discovered a code, a set of instructions for carrying out what Whitfield called the alignment ritual. The decoded text explained a ceremony that was to be carried out at dawn on the 13th of September, 1869. With 7 women standing at 7 windows, each reciting a different astronomical calculation as the sun's light streamed through the glass. Whitfield was able to ascend to the celestial plane through the doorway of sacrifice, which was explained as the ritual's purpose, to create a conduit between flesh and star. Exactly 100 years after the events at Whitfield Manor, the investigation was formally ended in 1969. The official conclusion was that Jeremiah Whitfield, or Wickham, had really kidnapped the 7 women from the Massachusetts Academy, perhaps with their initial consent, and set up a remote complex for what appeared to be ceremonial astronomical observations. From intellectual peers to inmates, their situation had gotten worse over time. According to the evidence, the ladies had slain Whitfield, burned the house down, and either ran away or, more likely in light of the burial findings, perished on the property, their remains concealed by an unidentified party. Still, there are questions. Who buried the women in such an exact pattern if they died? Why were there never any signs of them if they had escaped? What also accounted for the painstaking astronomical alignments that would have required years to organize and carry out? In her 1972 analysis of the case, historian Dr. Eliza Montgomery, who specializes in 19th century esoteric movements, put forth the following theory. The evidence suggests a tragic evolution from intellectual exploration to psychological manipulation and eventual imprisonment. Wickham likely began as a charismatic professor with unconventional ideas that attracted dedicated students. The isolated Ozarks setting provided perfect conditions for what modern psychology would identify as classic cult dynamics: separation from family and society, increasing control over daily activities, and the gradual normalization of extreme behaviors. The astronomical obsession served as both the justification for and the method of control. But what is left unexplained is the apparent sophistication of Whitfield's astronomical knowledge. His 28-year alignment cycle estimates were exceptionally accurate for the time, indicating that true astronomical expertise had been corrupted for unsettling purposes. A 1,969 message discovered paperclip to the Whitfield file in the Shannon County Sheriff's Archives may be the most unsettling element of the case. Visited Old Whitfield Place at dawn, the 13th of September, 1897. Could have sworn I saw 7 women standing in a circle in the mist where the house used to stand. When I approached, they were gone. Exactly 28 years since the fire. We'll return in 1925 to see if they appear again. This was the only note written in faded ink on the back of a deputy's calling card. The deputy who wrote it was identified as Thomas Breedlove, son of the Amos Breedlove who found Whitfield's body. Thomas was a deputy from 1892 to 1914 when he resigned without giving a reason, according to county personnel records. His private diary, given to the Historical Society by his granddaughter in 1970, includes further information about his 1897 trip to the Whitfield estate. The morning was unusually misty, the sun just breaking the horizon. As I approached the ruins of the eastern wall, I observed what appeared to be 7 female figures arranged in a circle where the house once stood. They wore what seemed to be white dresses, though the mist made details difficult to discern. Most disturbing was their stance. Each had one arm extended toward the center of the circle, where a shaft of sunlight penetrated the mist precisely through what would have been the central window. As I called out, the figures seemed to dissolve into the mist itself. I searched the area thoroughly, but found no footprints or evidence of human presence. The precision with which the sunlight aligned with the former window location, however, was undeniable. Whether or not this deputy kept his 1925 sunrise appointment is unknown. The next perfect alignment, according to astronomical calculations, would have happened in 1953, 1981, and 2009, respectively. For every 28-year conjunction, hikers and amateur astronomers occasionally travel to the location, which is now a part of the Mark Twain National Forest. While some have recalled the unnerving feeling of being watched from windows that no longer exist, none have claimed to have seen 7 women in the early mist. Robert Kellerman, a University of Missouri graduate student studying astronomy, set up camp in the Whitfield location in 1953 to witness the alignment. His field notes, which are housed in the university's archives, unusual occurrence. At precisely 6:17 a.m., As the sun crested the eastern ridge, the light struck the remains of the central window frame at a perfect angle. For approximately 42 seconds, the sunlight created what appeared to be a luminous pathway from the window to the center of what would have been the house. Most remarkable was the behavior of the local wildlife during this brief interval. Complete silence fell over the forest, followed by the sudden flight of every bird within hearing distance. Temperature readings showed an inexplicable drop of 7 degrees Fahrenheit during those 42 seconds, returning to normal immediately afterward. Those who are prepared to trek a few miles off the designated trails can still locate the Whitfield house's foundation stones. With 7 uniformly placed openings where windows previously let in the dawn sun, the eastern wall is the best maintained. According to local legend, if you put your head inside one of these vacant frames at sunrise, you may hear a woman's voice muttering astronomical calculations as she counts down to a future date when everything will line up perfectly. In his official reports, Forest Ranger Wilson Carpenter, who patrolled the area from 1975 to 1998, noted a number of odd occurrences at the location. In 1981, which occurred during the 28-year alignment cycle, he responded to reports of unusual lights at the old Whitfield ruins. Upon arrival, before dawn, observed no artificial lights, but noted an unusual atmospheric phenomenon: 7 distinct columns of mist rising from the ground where the eastern wall once stood. As the sun rose, each column appeared to refract the light differently, momentarily creating a rainbow effect. A subsequent investigation revealed no chemical agents or environmental factors that could explain the phenomenon. The Forest Service records attribute these incidents to potential exposure to limestone dust or fungal spores disturbed at the ruins, but no conclusive explanation was ever confirmed. The site has been officially closed to the public since 1978 after multiple hikers reported experiencing extreme disorientation and memory gaps after visiting the 7 windows. Unofficially, local rangers admitted to keeping a specific eye on the place every 28 years, when there is usually a rise in interest in the location. As part of a study on the power of suggestion and local folklore, psychology professor Helen Winters took a group of students to the site in 1977, just before it was closed. 3 subjects suffered from what Winters referred to in her abandoned research report as acute environmental psychosis, a sudden onset of identical delusions involving being asked to stand at a specific window and wait for the batter light, and the study was immediately stopped. After leaving the location, all 3 of the impacted pupils recovered in less than 48 hours, although none of them recalled anything from the incident. When the symptoms started, all 3 had been standing just in front of various window openings, according to Winters. A collection of items recovered from the Whitfield property is held by the Missouri Historical Society. These relics include surveyor's tools, pieces of astronomy gear, and 7 identical silver lockets that each appear to hold a different pressed flower. It is possible that the lockets were purposefully positioned beneath each of the 7 windows while the house was being built, since they were found there in 1968. An entire 24-hour cycle, a kind of botanical clock, is covered by the blooms of each flower, which have been identified as belonging to a species that opens its blooms at a particular time of day or night. Despite having been maintained for more than a century, all 7 blossoms at once disintegrated to dust while being photographed by curator Emmett Richardson, who cataloged these artifacts in 1970. The finding that each photograph had an unexplained light anomaly, a tiny star-like radiance that seemed to linger over each flower, was more unsettling after the photos were developed. Since the patterns matched the Pleiades constellation's configuration, equipment fault was ruled out. The most puzzling piece of evidence is still the journal that was found in 1957. Although the legitimacy of the letter as a 19th century document is confirmed by analysis of the paper and ink, several of its idiosyncrasies have never been explained. The most important is that a previously undetectable remark appears in the last entry's margins when exposed to UV light. The next alignment brings the 8th window. We will return when the circle is complete. 2037. It is written in what looks to be a different hand than the main text and reads simply, This cryptic message took on unexpected significance in 1980, when astronomers using improved telescopic technology confirmed that the Pleiades cluster contains hundreds of stars, including 8 particularly prominent members rather than just 7 major stars. An 8th star that is readily apparent to contemporary instrumentation was not taken into consideration by the traditional 7 sisters of classical astronomy. According to some scientists, this gap could be explained by the fact that one star has dramatically dimmed over the last few thousand years. This would have been an insignificant stellar occurrence during a human lifetime, but it could have been captured in ancient astronomical observations. Dr. Rachel Steinman visited the Missouri Historical Society in 1985 to study the Whitfield papers for her work on astronomical cults. Her notes describe a disconcerting event. While reviewing the original journal under controlled lighting conditions, I observed what appeared to be text fading in and out of visibility on several pages. Different content from what was normally visible. This phantom text appeared to be written in a mathematical cipher, similar to but distinct from the one used in Whitfield's astronomical journals. When I attempted to photograph these pages, no evidence of the secondary text appeared in the images. The phenomenon occurred only between 3:17 and 3:24 p.m., corresponding precisely to the time when sunlight through the archive's window fell directly on the document. The complete story of the 7-windowed house might never be revealed, as is the case with many historical mysteries from the isolated Ozarks. There are gaps in the records from that time period. Witnesses are long dead, and the terrain has changed due to almost a century of erosion and natural growth. All that is left is a disconcerting accumulation of evidence that points to an event at the Whitfield property that defies explanation, something involving 7 ladies, 7 windows, and a guy who was fixated on lining up the sky and earth. When Dr. Josephine Mercer released a contentious paper in 1992 implying a direct link between the Whitfield astronomical computations and specific medieval alchemical texts, the Whitfield case briefly reappeared in academic circles. Mercer claims that Whitfield's journals included allusions to obscure texts that dealt with the transformation of star energy into physical form. Basically, the idea that, with the right astronomical alignments, celestial bodies could be directed into human vessels. Despite being rejected by contemporary science, this idea had supporters in some occult circles in 19th century Europe, especially in the astronomical organizations of Germany and Austria, with whom Whitfield might have interacted. Several European astronomers who vanished from academic records in the 1850 seconds may have emigrated to America to follow hypotheses that were disproved by mainstream science, according to Mercer's research. Between 1851 and 1853, Wilhelm Krauss of the Vienna Observatory was one such individual who wrote a number of articles suggesting that, in certain circumstances, star awareness may be transmitted to humans. In the face of his colleagues' mockery, Krauss quit his job and disappeared from history. When Krauss's known publications and Whitfield's journals were compared, Mercer found remarkable parallels in their theoretical framework and handwriting, which raised the possibility that they were written by the same person. An 8th star in the Pleiades cluster, which had previously been too faint to be regularly spotted, was confirmed by astronomers at the Mount Palomar Observatory in California in 1957, the same year the Berry Journal was discovered. Even though hundreds of stars in the cluster are now recognized by modern astronomy, the timing of this finding in relation to the Whitfield case is still an unnerving coincidence. A sealed glass vessel was found buried about 4 feet underground in 1994 by construction workers extending a woodland road close to the former Whitfield property. A well-preserved manuscript in what forensic handwriting specialists determined to be Jeremiah Whitfield's script was found within. The paper, which was dated the 10th of September 1869, 2 days before he passed away, seemed to be the last set of instructions for the impending alignment ceremony. The most unsettling part was a section detailing backup plans in case any of the ships rebelled. Replacements must be secured. The alignment cannot be postponed another 28 years. The stellar gateway opens regardless of human readiness. Better an imperfect transmission than none at all. I have identified suitable alternatives in Eminence and West Plains, should the need arise. This revelation led historians to examine local census records in the months after the Whitfield incident. Interestingly, there were no recorded female disappearances in the area during that time, indicating that Whitfield's backup plans were never carried out either because the vessels cooperated or because things took a surprising turn on the evening of September 12th. The majority of the Whitfield property has been reclaimed by the forest. What used to be the house's foundation is now covered with trees. Some alignments remain in the landscape, immovable elements that continue to mark the pattern of the seven sisters in the earth as they do in the sky above. Even though the creek's path has slightly changed throughout the decades of yearly flooding, and every 28 years park rangers report a strange quiet in the forest, as though nature itself is waiting, holding its breath, when the sun rises exactly where the center window used to be. As part of an environmental impact study, geologist Dr. Sarah Fleming carried out a thorough geological investigation of the region in 2001. Soil samples from these 7 locations show inexplicable electromagnetic properties not present in surrounding areas. Each location exhibits a distinct electromagnetic signature, yet all 7 form what appears to be a harmonically related sequence. It was noted in her report that the soil had an odd quality at 7 specific points that corresponded to the former locations of the 7 windows. Most curious is that these electromagnetic anomalies intensify during the hours surrounding dawn, particularly on clear days, suggesting some interaction with solar radiation. The phenomenon has no obvious geological explanation. Officially, the case of Jeremiah Whitfield and his 7 daughters is still categorized as a historical murder in which possible suspects vanished. Unofficially, it has been included into the darker Ozark mythology, as a reminder that certain obsessions are inexplicable and that some patterns, once formed, have an impact that lasts long after the people who created them have left. Martin Crilly, a documentary filmmaker, tried to create a historical analysis of the Whitfield case in 2005. Numerous equipment faults occurred during filming at the location, according to his production notes, which were submitted to the Missouri Film Commission. At certain points, especially close to the remnants of the eastern wall, cameras would mysteriously lose power. The most unsettling finding was that video captured through the remaining window frames showed 7 different spectra that, upon analysis, matched the spectroscopic signatures of the 7 primary stars in the Pleiades cluster. These anomalies were unexplained light anomalies that were not discernible to the human eye. After 3 weeks, Crilly called off the project due to staff discomfort and unsustainable production conditions. The location of the 7-windowed house is still avoided by the locals, especially around morning. What sound engineers referred to as mathematical whispers were captured on audio recordings. A faint female voice reciting what sounded like astronomical calculations. In 1972, a folklore researcher was told by an elderly Eminence resident that some places hold echoes of what happened there, and some echoes are best left unheard. The Missouri Paranormal Research Society's 2008 investigation produced mixed findings. Marcus Davidson, the team leader, reported, "While we detected no conventional evidence of paranormal activity, our equipment registered unusual phenomena specific to the 7-window locations. Temperature fluctuations, electromagnetic field variations, and audio anomalies followed a predictable pattern, rotating among the 7 sites in 42-minute intervals, completing a full cycle every 4 hours and 54 minutes. Precisely the time the Pleiades is visible above the horizon at this latitude. Whether this represents some form of residual energy or simply unusual geophysical properties remains undetermined. Although Whitfield Manor's 7 windows are no longer physically present, the areas they once filled are still there. A celestial calendar whose purpose perished with Jeremiah Whitfield, with 7 exactly aligned absences framing the rising sun every 28 years. Or maybe that purpose just waits for its next alignment, its next manifestation, or its next 7 viewers, as the journal's hidden message implies. A small group of graduate students, led by Dr. Nicholas Chen, a professor of astronomy, documented the event in 2009 at the most recent 28-year alignment. The astounding accuracy of Whitfield's estimates was validated by their study, which was published in the Journal of Archaean Astronomy. As anticipated by Whitfield's 1869 calculations, the sun rose precisely at 6 hours, 17 minutes, and 28 seconds a.m., in line with the opening of the center window. Sunlight flowed through all 7 window openings, in a particular order, for around 42 seconds, producing what seemed to be a concentrated beam in the middle of the previous building. The remarkable mathematical accuracy needed to compute this alignment with 19th-century techniques indicates Whitfield had astronomical knowledge that was above average for his time. Chen's group also observed a strange occurrence. During the 42-second alignment, our equipment recorded 7 distinct temperature zones within the foundation perimeter, each differing by exactly 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit from adjacent zones. These temperature differentials formed a pattern matching the relative luminosity ratios of the 7 main stars in the Pleiades cluster. This phenomenon has no conventional scientific explanation. Anecdotal reports from hikers, rangers, and townspeople who have experienced strange occurrences at the Whitfield site have been preserved by local historian Margaret Holloway. Reports of women's voices repeating numbers in unison, atmospheric distortions seen through the empty window frames, and watches or other clocks breaking down nearby, often stopping at 6:17 a.m. are among them. Irrespective of when they were examined, even if these stories are not supported by science, the fact that they have persisted throughout the years points to a strong folklore tradition about the place. A ground-penetrating radar archaeological examination in 2015 uncovered further irregularities beneath the old home foundation. The survey's leader, Dr. Thomas Reynolds, stated, "We discovered what appears to be a secondary foundation layer approximately 8 feet below the known cellar level. This deeper structure predates the Whitfield house by many decades, possibly representing an earlier attempt to establish a structure at this astronomically significant location." More curious was the discovery of a chamber directly beneath where the central window once stood, containing what imaging suggests is a stone pillar or column aligned with magnetic north. This feature does not appear to be natural and would have required significant effort to position at this depth. On the 13th of September 2037, the next perfect alignment will take place. The last answers to the 7 windows enigma might possibly surface from the Ozarks morning mist. The case is still regarded as one of the most unsettling and mysterious periods in Missouri's obscure past. Researchers who examine the relationship between cult dynamics, psychology, and astronomy have recently given the Whitfield case more attention. According to a 2018 paper by Dr. Close, Eleanor Voss, a psychiatric historian at Washington University, the Whitfield case was a perfect storm of astronomical obsession, charismatic manipulation, and isolated environmental conditions, creating an escalating cycle of control and delusion. Voss hypothesized that what probably started out as an intellectual endeavor eventually evolved into something more sinister as Whitfield's mental state deteriorated. According to her interpretation of his writings, he gradually came to believe that he was communicating directly with the stars through astronomical measurements, and he eventually persuaded himself that the Pleiades cluster was trying to reach Earth via human ships. Conditions for what contemporary psychiatry would categorize as a shared psychotic disease were established by this illusion, which was further strengthened by the remoteness of the Ozark environment and his total authority over his female classmates. Unaccounted for, however, are the mathematical accuracy of Whitfield's astronomical calculations, the intricate terrestrial mirroring of the Pleiades constellation in the landscape, and, of course, the final fate of the 7 women. The women's journals suggest an initial willingness to participate in astronomical research, Voss wrote, followed by increasing doubt and resistance as Whitfield's demands became more extreme. The underground chambers likely represented a transition from voluntary participation to forced confinement as the women attempted to resist or escape. No trace of their later lives has ever been found. If they did kill Whitfield and flee, who laid their bodies in such a neat pattern in the creek bed if they died on the property? And why do the same things keep happening every 28 years? In the months after the Whitfield event, 7 women who fit the broad description of the daughters enrolled in studies at 7 separate women's schools across the United States. from Massachusetts to California. According to historical documents from Shannon County, this is an interesting addition. They all characterize their prior education as private study in astronomical sciences. By 1875, all 7 had earned degrees in astronomy, mathematics, or similar studies. However, they each enrolled under a different last name. All had vanished from public records by 1880. Whatever Whitefield thought he was doing with his 7 windows and 7 women, he created something that continues to reverberate through that landscape. Maybe the most poetic, if not scientific, assessment was provided by Dr. Marcus Davidson, the paranormal researcher who studied the site in 2008. Some places become thin points between worlds, not through supernatural forces, but through the sheer intensity of human obsession focused on a single purpose over time. The windows framed not only the rising sun, but a particular human madness, the belief that with enough precision, the heavens could be brought to earth. Although it is not shown on official forest maps, the Whitefield property is nonetheless theoretically accessible and public land. People who manage to reach the 7 window openings frequently describe feeling both beckoned and monitored at the same time. The frames, which are now only holes in a deteriorating stone wall, continue to line up perfectly with the rising sun and the Pleiades constellation every 28 years. Interest in the site will surely grow as September 13th, 2037 draws near. Those 7 vacant frames in the Missouri wilderness will be visited by astronomers, historians, and the simply inquisitive. Through windows constructed by a star-obsessed guy, they will stand where 7 women previously stood, watching the dawn. And they might catch a glimpse of what Whitefield so frantically tried to depict, the instant when heaven and earth seem to briefly touch when the sun is properly aligned with the center opening. Until that time, the 7 windows continue to exist as absences rather than as tangible objects, framing empty space and emphasizing what is gone rather than what is left. They have thus turned into the ideal monument to the Whitefield mystery itself, a narrative that is characterized more by the unknown than by the known. In the Pleiades cluster, 400 light-years from Earth, 7 stars shine without realizing the obsession they once sparked in a remote Ozark valley. This obsession turned astronomical observation into something much darker, leaving 7 windows looking eastward in anticipation of the ideal dawn. The forest still grows around the ruins, and the creek still flows past the circular pattern of buried stones.